A woman 8 months pregnant stood in the chilling evening air, her tears tracing paths on her cold cheeks. Through the magnificent wrought-iron gates of the Crestwood estate, she could see the glittering chandeliers and hear the faint sound of laughter. Her husband, Gaius Horton, was inside, hosting the party of the season with his beautiful new socialite girlfriend on his arm. To the uniformed security guard, she was a nuisance. To the arriving guests in their luxury cars, she was a pathetic spectacle. But they had no idea who she really was, or the seismic secret she carried. Because in less than an hour, this crying, heartbroken woman would hold the deed to their host's $80 million world, and every single guest would be standing on her property. The cold was the first thing Brooklyn Reyes felt. It seeped through her thin cardigan, a stark contrast to the warmth radiating from the magnificent limestone mansion beyond the gates. The Crestwood estate wasn't just a house, it was a landmark, a sprawling testament to old money and new power, perched atop the highest hill overlooking the city. Tonight it was a beacon of light and laughter, every window ablaze, casting a golden glow that felt like a personal insult. Brooklyn's hand rested protectively on the prominent swell of her belly, a subconscious gesture of comfort. Her baby, their baby, kicked gently oblivious to the fact that its mother was standing outside in the dark like a beggar. A tear escaped hot and swift, sliding down her cheek before the wind chilled it. She wasn't just crying from the cold. She was crying from the sheer, soul-crushing weight of her humiliation. A sleek black Bentley purred to a stop beside her. The window slid down to reveal a woman with diamonds sparkling at her throat, her face a mask of carefully constructed pity. "Oh, my dear," she cooed, her voice dripping with insincere sympathy. "Are you quite all right? You look dreadfully lost." Brooklyn recognized her. Mrs. Harriet Chen, one of her husband Gaius's key investors, a woman who had just 3 months ago complimented Brooklyn on her impeccable taste at a charity luncheon. Tonight her eyes held no recognition, only a dismissive curiosity for the melodrama unfolding at the gate. "I'm fine, thank you," Brooklyn mumbled, turning her face away, hoping the shadows would swallow her. The security guard, a large man named Frank, whom she had once known by name and shared coffee with, stepped forward. "Ma'am, I've told you. Mr. Horton's instructions were clear. You are not to be on the premises." His voice was flat, devoid of the friendly warmth he once had. He was just following orders. Gaius's orders. The words echoed in her mind, sharp and cruel as they had been 2 days ago. "It's over, Brooklyn. I'm filing for divorce. Genevieve is the future of this family, and I will not have you making a scene." As if on cue, a silver Aston Martin, Gaius's latest toy, roared up the winding driveway. He was in the driver's seat, looking impossibly handsome in his custom tuxedo. Beside him, radiant and glowing, was Genevieve Laurent. Her laughter, light and musical, carried on the wind and felt like a physical blow to Brooklyn's chest. Genevieve, the daughter of a French shipping magnate with a pedigree as flawless as her skin. She was everything Brooklyn wasn't. She was from his world. Gaius didn't even glance in Brooklyn's direction as he swiped his keycard. The ornate iron gates adorned with the Horton family crest began to swing silently inward. But Genevieve saw her. Her perfect ruby-red lips curved into a small, triumphant smirk. It was a look of pure victory, a silent declaration that she had won. She had taken Brooklyn's husband, her home, her life. Brooklyn's breath hitched. That look more than anything broke through her grief and ignited a spark of cold fury. She had given Gaius 5 years of her life. She had supported him when his tech venture was just a dream, sketched on a napkin. She had managed his home, hosted his dinners, and charmed his business partners. She was carrying his son. And for all of it, her reward was to be discarded and left crying outside the gates while her replacement lived the life she had helped build. As the Aston Martin disappeared up the drive, another car, a simple black town car, pulled up behind Mrs. Chen's Bentley. The back window lowered, and a man with a kind, weary face leaned out. He was holding a crisp, cream-colored envelope. "Brooklyn Reyes?" he asked, his voice gentle. Brooklyn blinked, wiping her eyes. "Yes. My name is Robert Peterson. I'm an attorney. This is for you." He passed the envelope to her. It was heavy, made of expensive cardstock. Her name was written on the front in elegant calligraphy. Confused, she took it. I don't understand." "Just open it," he said softly. "And I would advise you to attend. It's a matter of some importance." With that, his window slid up, and the town car drove away, not towards the mansion, but back down the hill. Brooklyn's trembling fingers fumbled with the seal. Insealed was a single thick card. It wasn't a letter or a legal document. It was an invitation. "You are cordially invited to the reading of the last will and testament of Mr. Alistair Beaumont. Tonight at 9 o'clock, the Grand Library, Crestwood Estate." Brooklyn stared at the name. Mr. Beaumont, the quiet, elderly man from the city library. The kind soul she'd spent hours with over the last year, reading to him, listening to his stories, sharing her own quiet fears about her marriage. He had passed away a week ago. She'd mourned him as the only true friend she had left. But what did his will have to do with Crestwood Estate? And why was the reading happening tonight in the middle of Gaius's party? A new feeling began to push through the humiliation and despair. It was a fragile, flickering thing, but it was there. It was resolve. Gaius wanted her to disappear. Genevieve wanted her to crumble. The world he had built wanted to forget her. But she had an invitation. She looked from the card to the glittering mansion, the fortress from which she had been exiled. She tucked the invitation into her pocket, squared her shoulders, and took a deep, steadying breath. The cold no longer bothered her. "Frank," she said, her voice clear and strong, devoid of the tears that had stained it moments before. "I have an invitation. I'm going in." 5 years earlier, Brooklyn Reyes had been a junior art curator with a passion for obscure Renaissance painters and a tiny apartment filled with more books than furniture. Gaius Horton had walked into the gallery she was working at, not to look at the art, but to scout the building for a potential acquisition. He was a force of nature, charming, ambitious, with a smile that could disarm armies and a vision that seemed limitless. He didn't see the art on the walls. He saw her. He'd pursued her with a relentless, dizzying intensity. He sent bouquets of rare black irises to her gallery, flew her to Florence for a weekend on a whim to see a Caravaggio, and listened with rapt attention as she spoke about her dreams. He told her she was a classic, a timeless masterpiece in a world of fleeting trends. For a girl who had always felt a little ordinary, his words were a potent elixir. Her friends were wary. "He's from a different universe. Brooklyn!" Her best friend, Sarah, had warned over coffee. "These men, they collect beautiful things. Make sure you know if you're part of the collection or his partner." Brooklyn had dismissed it as jealousy. She was in love. Gaius's world was intoxicating. He was building a tech empire, Horton Innovations. and he told her she was his anchor, his muse. Their wedding was a lavish affair, a feature in society magazines. She moved into the historic Horton family home, a beautiful brownstone in the city, and began the slow, difficult process of navigating his life. The first cracks appeared subtly. His mother, Beatrice Horton, was a woman carved from ice who viewed Brooklyn not as a daughter-in-law, but as a temporary custodian of the family name. "My son needs a wife who can command a boardroom, not just arrange flowers, dear," she once remarked coolly, watching Brooklyn set the table for a dinner party. Beatrice made it clear that Brooklyn, with her middle-class background and arts degree, was a liability, a starter wife, until Gaius found someone more suitable. Gaius at first defended her. "Don't listen to her, darling. She's from another era." But as his company grew, so did his absences. Business trips became longer late nights at the office, more frequent. The intimate dinners for two were replaced by large, impersonal corporate events, where Brooklyn felt like an accessory pinned to his arm. He would praise her in public, "My beautiful, brilliant wife." But in private, the silence between them grew vast and cold. The move to Crestwood Estate had been Gaius's idea. He'd bought the legendary property 6 months ago, declaring it a symbol of their arrival. "This isn't just a house, Brooklyn," he'd said, standing on the grand terrace overlooking the city. "It's a statement. This is our dynasty." But it never felt like hers. It was a museum of a life she was supposed to be living. The staff reported to a house manager Gaius hired. The decorators consulted him. She was a guest in her own home. It was during this time that she realized she was pregnant. She had hoped with a desperate, aching optimism that a baby would change everything, that it would bridge the chasm that had opened between them. She told him on their anniversary. He was on his phone, closing a deal. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "A baby," he said the words flat. "Well, we'll have to make room in the East Wing nursery." There was no joy, no shared excitement. It was a logistical problem to be solved. A week later, she heard the whispers. Genevieve Laurent. At first, it was just a name mentioned in the society pages, a photograph of her standing next to Gaius at a gala in Zurich he was supposedly attending alone. When Brooklyn confronted him, he didn't deny it. "Genevieve understands my world," he said calmly, straightening his tie, refusing to meet her eyes. "Her father's network is invaluable. This is business, Brooklyn. You're being emotional." "Emotional, I am carrying your child Gaius," she had screamed, the sound swallowed by the cavernous marble foyer. "And you will be well compensated for it," he replied, his voice chillingly devoid of emotion. "A Horton heir deserves the best, and you will want for nothing. But my life, my public life, that requires a partner of a certain caliber. Try to understand." The gilded cage had slammed shut. She was to be the mother of his heir, kept comfortable and hidden away, while he built a new life with another woman. The humiliation was a slow poison. He began hosting parties at Crestwood without her introducing Genevieve as his close associate. The staff, loyal to the man who signed their checks, began to treat Brooklyn with a polite but firm distance. She was the mistress of the house in name only. Her domain shrank to her bedroom suite and the gardens she wandered alone. That was where she had been sitting on a cold stone bench in the rose garden when the final blow had come 2 days ago. Gaius and Genevieve had walked out onto the terrace, champagne in hand. They hadn't seen her. She watched as he laughed, then leaned in and kissed Genevieve with a passion he hadn't shown Brooklyn in years. The world had tilted on its axis. Later that evening he had come to her room and delivered the final verdict. The divorce papers would be drawn up. A generous settlement would be arranged. She was to vacate the property by the end of the week. "And the party tonight," he'd said, his voice cold and final, "is for Genevieve. To formally introduce her. Don't be here, Brooklyn. Don't make it difficult." So she had packed a small bag, her hands shaking her heart a shattered ruin. But she hadn't been able to leave. She had to see it for herself, this final public execution of their marriage. That's what led her to the gates, to the tears, to the edge of utter despair. But now, holding the thick, creamy invitation in her hand, the past 5 years coalesced into a single, burning point of clarity. Sarah had been right. She was a beautiful thing in his collection, and now he was trading her in for a newer model. The love, the promises, the shared dreams, it was all a lie. But the baby in her womb was real. Her pain was real. And this invitation, this felt like the only real thing to happen to her in months. It was a lifeline, a mystery, a reason to walk back into the lion's den. She didn't know what Mr. Beaumont had planned, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't just a victim in someone else's story. She was a character with a purpose. Her friendship with Alistair Beaumont had been an accident, a small, quiet rebellion against the suffocating grandeur of Crestwood. Lonely and adrift, Brooklyn had sought refuge in the one place that had always felt like home, a library. Not a grand, private one, like the mahogany-paneled room at the estate, but the sprawling, slightly dusty public library downtown. It was anonymous, warm, and smelled of aging paper and promise. She found him in the history section, a frail-looking man with hands gnarled by age and eyes that were startlingly clear and intelligent. He was trying to reach a heavy tome on a high shelf, his breath coming in short, frustrated gasps. "Allow me," Brooklyn had said, easily retrieving the book for him. It was a dense volume on Byzantine architecture. He'd thanked her with a genuinely warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Alistair," he'd introduced himself. "Brooklyn," she replied, omitting her last name. Here she didn't want to be Brooklyn Horton, the wife of a tech mogul. She just wanted to be Brooklyn. They started meeting regularly. Every Tuesday and Thursday she would drive her modest sedan into the city and spend the afternoon with him. He was a man of simple habits and profound knowledge. He wore the same tweed jacket, slightly frayed at the elbows, and drank his tea with 2 sugars. He never spoke of family or his past in grand terms. He told her he was a retired history professor, living on a modest pension. She believed him. To Brooklyn, he was a sanctuary. She could talk to him in a way she could no longer talk to Gaius. She told him about her love for art, a passion Gaius had dismissed as a cute hobby. Alistair, however, would listen intently, asking thoughtful questions and sharing his own insights. He knew more about the Sienese school of painting than any of her old professors. As her pregnancy progressed and her marriage deteriorated, Alistair became her confidant. She never burdened him with the ugly details, but he could read the sadness in her eyes. "That husband of yours," he said one afternoon, his voice gentle but firm as he looked at her bruised spirit. "He seeks value in things that glitter, but gold, my dear Brooklyn, is a soft metal. It bends easily. True strength is in things that endure. Like kindness, like integrity." She'd cried, then silent tears she wiped away quickly. "He's all I have," she whispered, a fact that felt both true and terribly pathetic. Alistair had reached across the table and patted her hand. His skin was like paper. "No, my dear, you have yourself, and that is more than enough." When she told him she was pregnant, his face lit up with a joy so pure and genuine it made her ache. "A child," he'd exclaimed. "The world's greatest masterpiece, a continuation of the story." From then on, he would always ask, "And how is our little masterpiece doing today?" He became her surrogate grandfather, the steady paternal presence she had lost years ago. She would bring him soup when he had a cold, read him the newspaper when his eyes tired, and describe the new paintings at the City Gallery. She was in her own small way, taking care of him. It gave her a sense of purpose that her life at Crestwood lacked. She had no idea that in reality, he was taking care of her. She never once suspected he was anything other than what he seemed. He lived in a simple, tidy apartment above a bakery. He took the bus. He fretted about the rising cost of butter. He was just Alistair, her friend. The last time she saw him was 2 weeks before the party. He was weaker than she had ever seen him, confined to his armchair. His breathing was shallow. "I'm going on a long journey soon, Brooklyn." He'd said, his voice a faint whisper. "Don't say that, Alistair. You just need to rest. I'll bring you some of that beef stew you like tomorrow." She'd replied, her voice thick with worry. He had smiled faintly. "You have been a great blessing to a lonely old man," he said, his clear eyes fixed on hers. "Never forget your worth, and never let anyone make you feel small. You are not defined by the grandness of a house, but by the goodness of your heart. Promise me you'll remember that." "I promise," she whispered, squeezing his hand. A week later, his landlady called to tell her he had passed away peacefully in his sleep. Brooklyn was devastated. With Alistair gone, she felt utterly, completely alone. His small, humble funeral was attended by only a handful of people. Brooklyn stood at the back, a solitary, pregnant woman, in black, mourning the loss of her only friend. She never saw the discreet, well-dressed man in the expensive suit watching her from a distance. That man was Robert Peterson Alistair Beaumont's lifelong attorney and executor. Now, standing outside the gates of Crestwood, the invitation in her hand felt like a message from beyond the grave. Alistair Beaumont. The reading of the last will and testament at Crestwood Estate. It made no sense. How could her humble pension-drawing friend have any connection to this bastion of wealth and power? This place that represented everything he wasn't, unless he wasn't who he said he was. The thought sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. A memory surfaced. One afternoon, Gaius had been ranting about a competitor, a reclusive, legendary figure in the finance world who had outmaneuvered him on a major deal. "The man's a ghost," Gaius had fumed. "Nobody's seen him in 20 years. They say he lives like a hermit, but he controls half the city. Beaumont. Alistair Beaumont." Brooklyn's blood ran cold. It couldn't be. The world tilted again, but this time it wasn't from grief. It was from a dizzying, terrifying realization. Her kind, gentle Alistair, the man in the frayed tweed jacket, was the Alistair Beaumont, the billionaire recluse, the titan of industry. And for some reason his will was being read in her husband's house. No, not her husband's house. Gaius's house. She walked towards the gate, her stride purposeful. Frank the guard moved to block her way. "Ma'am, please, don't make me call for assistance." Brooklyn looked him straight in the eye. She didn't raise her voice. She simply held out the invitation. "I believe this grants me admission, Frank. It's for the 9 o'clock reading in the library." He took the invitation, his brow furrowed in confusion. He shone his flashlight on it, reading the elegant script. His eyes widened. He looked from the card to Brooklyn and back again. The name Alistair Beaumont carried a weight that even a security guard at a place like Crestwood understood. He swallowed hard, his professional demeanor cracking. "My apologies, Mrs. Ma'am," he stammered, handing it back. He immediately spoke into his radio, his voice now laced with a frantic urgency. He opened the pedestrian gate with a click. "Please go right in." As Brooklyn stepped onto the grounds of the estate, she was no longer the discarded wife. She was an enigma, and she was about to walk into the heart of her enemy's celebration to uncover her dead friend's final secret. The crunch of her sensible flats on the perfectly manicured gravel driveway was the only sound as Brooklyn walked towards the house. Each step was deliberate, a stark contrast to the trembling uncertainty that had gripped her just minutes earlier. The knowledge of Alistair's true identity hadn't sunk in yet. It was a bizarre, surreal fact suspended in her mind. For now, it was simply armor. The heavy oak doors of the mansion were propped open, spilling golden light and the melodic strains of a string quartet onto the stone steps. As she approached, two valets in crisp uniforms looked at her, their expressions a mixture of confusion and disdain. Her simple maternity dress and cardigan were a world away from the designer gowns and tailored tuxedos gliding past her. She ignored them and stepped across the threshold into the grand marble foyer. The change was jarring. The air inside was warm, scented with expensive perfume and exotic flowers. A massive crystal chandelier, a relic from the estate's original owners, glittered overhead, scattering rainbows across the polished floors. The sound of clinking glasses, sophisticated laughter, and polite conversation washed over her. It was the soundtrack of Gaius's world. And then they saw her. The conversations nearest the door faltered and died. Heads turned. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd like a virus. Brooklyn felt hundreds of eyes on her, sharp with judgment and morbid curiosity. This was Gaius Horton's pregnant cast-aside wife, the one he'd replaced with the flawless Genevieve Laurel. Her presence here was a scandal, a delicious piece of live gossip. She saw Harriet Chen, the woman from the Bentley, her mouth agape. She saw Connor Webb, Gaius's business partner, whispering urgently to his wife. And she saw Beatrice Horton, her mother-in-law, standing near the grand staircase like a queen, surveying her court. Beatrice's face, already a mask of aristocratic disapproval, tightened into a venomous scowl. Beatrice detached herself from her circle of admirers and glided towards Brooklyn, her silk gown rustling with indignation. "Brooklyn," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "What is the meaning of this? You were told explicitly not to come. How dare you create such a scene?" "I have an invitation, Beatrice," Brooklyn said calmly, her voice steady despite the frantic pounding of her heart. "Don't be absurd," Beatrice hissed. "Gaius would never. It's not from Gaius." Before Beatrice could retort, the two main actors in this drama made their entrance. Gaius and Genevieve descended the grand staircase, a triumphant couple basking in the adulation of their guests. Gaius was holding a microphone, about to make a toast. He beamed at the crowd, the perfect host. Genevieve was clinging to his arm, her diamond necklace flashing under the chandelier, her smile radiant. Then Gaius saw her. His smile vanished, replaced by a flash of pure fury. The blood drained from his face, then returned in a dark, angry flush. He handed the microphone to a stunned aide and strode towards her. Genevieve trailing in his wake, her expression one of utter disbelief and annoyance. The entire party fell silent. The string quartet, sensing the shift in mood, tapered off into a discordant squeak. Every eye in the room was fixed on the confrontation. "What in God's name are you doing here?" Gaia seethed, grabbing her arm and pulling her into a small alcove partially hidden by a large potted palm. His grip was painfully tight. "Let go of me, Gaius," Brooklyn said, her voice trembling slightly but firm. "I told you to stay away. Are you trying to ruin me?" "To ruin this evening?" His voice was a venomous whisper. Genevieve stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "You have no right to be here," she said, her French accent sharpening the edges of her words. "This is a private party. You are trespassing." "Actually," Brooklyn said, pulling her arm free from Gaius's grasp, "I have every right. I was invited." "Invited by who?" Gaius scoffed. "The ghost of Christmas past. No one here wants you." "I was invited by a Mr. Alistair Beaumont, or rather by his attorney," Brooklyn said, watching their faces carefully. The name hit them like a physical blow. Gaius froze, his anger momentarily replaced by confusion. "Beaumont? What are you talking about? He's dead?" "I'm aware," Brooklyn replied. "His will is being read, tonight at 9 o'clock, in the library." Gaius stared at her, his mind clearly racing. Alistair Beaumont was a legend, a phantom who had haunted his business dealings for years. He knew Beaumont had owned vast strategic properties and holdings, some of which Gaius had been trying unsuccessfully to acquire. But what connection could he possibly have to Brooklyn? "This is insane," Gaius stammered. "A prank? You're making this up to cause a scene." "Am I?" Brooklyn asked, a newfound strength rising within her. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, righteous anger. "Why would Alistair Beaumont's final will and testament be read in your house, Gaius?" Genevieve, ever the pragmatist, sneered. "Perhaps the old man was senile. Perhaps he was a distant relative of the previous owners. It means nothing. You are using this as a pathetic excuse to humiliate Gaius. The security will remove you." "No," Gaius said suddenly. His eyes narrowed in calculation. A different kind of energy now emanated from him, not just anger, but avarice, greed. "No, wait." He turned to Brooklyn, his tone shifting from rage to a false conspiratorial gentleness. "Brooklyn, what was your relationship with Mr. Beaumont?" The question hung in the air. He was already seeing an angle away to profit from this bizarre situation. If his estranged wife had somehow found favor with the dead billionaire, perhaps there was something in it for him. A piece of the estate, a company away to finally get his hands on the assets Beaumont had kept out of his reach. "He was my friend," Brooklyn said, simply the word feeling both powerful and inadequate. A clock on the mantelpiece began to chime. It was 9 o'clock. Just then the quiet man from the town car, Robert Peterson, appeared at the entrance to the Grand Library. He was impeccably dressed in a dark conservative suit, carrying a leather briefcase. He surveyed the silent, gawking crowd with an air of complete authority. "My apologies for the interruption," he announced, his voice carrying easily through the silent hall. "The reading of the last will and testament of Alistair Beaumont is about to commence. It is a private matter, but my client's instructions were very specific about the time and location." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room before landing directly on Brooklyn. "Ms. Brooklyn Reyes, we are ready for you." The entire room gasped as one. He had called her. Not Gaius, not Beatrice, not some long-lost relative, but the disgraced pregnant wife. Brooklyn met Gaius's stunned, greedy gaze. She saw the furious confusion on Genevieve's face and the utter shock on her mother-in-law's. For the first time, she was not the one on the outside looking in. She held a key to a mystery they were all desperate to solve. Without another word, she turned her back on her husband and walked towards the library, leaving a wake of stunned silence and 1,000 frantic questions behind her. The grand library at Crestwood was Gaius's favorite room. It was a cathedral of knowledge and power, with floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves, a rolling ladder, and a fireplace large enough to stand in. It was where he held his most important meetings, where he intimidated rivals and charmed investors. Tonight it felt like a courtroom. Robert Peterson stood behind a massive oak desk, the leather briefcase open before him. He had taken out a thick document tied with a simple blue ribbon. Brooklyn sat in one of the plush leather armchairs facing the desk. She felt strangely calm, a quiet observer in the storm that was brewing just outside the library doors. Gaius, Genevieve, and Beatrice had followed her in. They couldn't help themselves. The lure of the Beaumont fortune was too strong. They stood huddled by the doorway, a tableau of greed and anxiety. Several other curious and influential guests, including Connor Webb and Harriet Chen, lingered just behind them, shamelessly eavesdropping. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat, his expression impassive. Before I begin, I must state for the record that the terms of this will are legally binding and have been verified for soundness of mind and body of the testator, Mr. Alistair Beaumont, at the time of its signing 1 month ago. He untied the ribbon and flattened the document. I will dispense with the usual legal preamble and proceed to the primary bequests, as per my client's instructions, for a swift and clear execution. He adjusted his glasses and began to read. To my various charitable foundations, I leave the bulk of my liquid assets, amounting to approximately $2 billion, to be distributed as per the private instructions left with my executor. A collective quiet gasp came from the doorway. 2 billion. The number was so vast it was almost comical. Gaius's face was a tight mask of calculation. To my loyal staff, including my housekeeper, my driver, and my personal nurse. Peterson continued, I bequeath the sums listed in Appendix A, ensuring their comfortable retirement. He paused. To my attorney and executor, Robert Peterson, I bequeath my collection of antique maps and a discretionary fund for his services. Peterson looked up, his gaze sweeping over Gaius, Genevieve, and Beatrice, before settling back on the page. Now we come to the matter of my remaining personal property and primary real estate holdings. The air in the room grew thick with tension. This was it. Gaius leaned forward slightly, his entire body rigid with anticipation. He had spent years trying to figure out Beaumont's real estate portfolio. My brownstone in the city, Peterson read, along with its contents, and my summer home in the Hamptons I bequeath to the city's Historical Preservation Society to be maintained as museums. Gaius's face fell. He'd had his eye on the brownstone for years. My controlling shares in Beaumont Industries, valued at approximately $400 million. This was the prize. Beaumont Industries held patents and technologies that could supercharge Horton innovations into the global stratosphere. Gaius held his breath. I bequeath to an educational trust for the advancement of young people from underprivileged backgrounds in the fields of science and the arts. A low groan escaped from Connor Webb in the doorway. Gaius looked like he'd been punched in the gut. All that power, all that potential given away to charity and education. It was in his mind an unforgivable waste. And finally, Peterson said, his voice lowering slightly, creating a dramatic hush. "We come to my primary residence. This property. The Crestwood estate." Brooklyn's head shot up. This property, Alistair lived in a tiny apartment above a bakery. What was Peterson talking about? Gaius scoffed out loud. "That's impossible. I own Crestwood Estate. I have the deed, the title. I bought it 6 months ago from the Sterling Corporation." Peterson looked at Gaius over the rim of his glasses, his expression one of mild pity. "You purchased the estate, Mr. Horton, that is correct. What you may not have been aware of is who the sole proprietor of the Sterling Corporation was." He let the statement hang in the air for a beat. It was a holding company, one of many owned entirely by Mr. Alistair Beaumont. The world stopped. Gaius's face turned ashen. He had bought the estate from Alistair Beaumont himself without ever knowing it. He had paid top dollar $80 million to the very man he considered his rival. "Mr. Beaumont sold you the property," Peterson continued, his voice calm and methodical, "because he knew of your ambitions, and he had a particular interest in its future, which brings me to the final bequest." He looked down at the will. Then his eyes moved from the paper directly to Brooklyn. To Brooklyn Reyes. He read his voice, ringing with clarity and finality, who showed an old man profound kindness and friendship in his final days, without ever knowing his station or seeking any reward. To Brooklyn Reyes, who reminded me of the integrity and goodness that still exists in this world. To Brooklyn Reyes, who deserves a safe and beautiful place to raise her child, a masterpiece in the making. I hereby bequeath in its entirety the property known as the Crestwood Estate, located at 1 Crestwood Drive, including the main house, all surrounding lands, and all art and furnishings contained within. Silence. Absolute, deafening silence. Brooklyn felt the air leave her lungs. Her mind couldn't process the words. Owner of Crestwood. This house, her prison, her gilded cage. It was hers. The silence was shattered by a high-pitched, incredulous laugh from Genevieve. "This is a joke. This is a ridiculous, transparent joke. He was a senile old fool, and this gold digger obviously manipulated him. I assure you, Miss Laurent, Mr. Beaumont was of perfectly sound mind," Peterson said coldly, "and his decision was motivated not by manipulation, but by his observation of character, both Ms. Reyes's and Mr. Horton's." Gaius finally found his voice. It was a strangled, disbelieving rasp. No, I paid for this house. It's my name on the company party invitations. My money. You paid Mr. Beaumont $80 million for it." "Yes," Peterson said smoothly. "And that money has now been transferred as part of his liquid assets to his charitable foundations. But Mr. Beaumont included a specific clause in the sale. A buyback option triggered upon his death for the sum of $1. An option which in his will he assigned to his sole beneficiary for this property." Peterson slid a single document across the desk toward Brooklyn along with a pen. "This is the deed transfer, Ms. Reyes. As of the moment you sign this, the $80 million estate your husband just threw a party in becomes yours for the price of a single dollar." Every eye in the room swiveled from the lawyer to Gaius's apoplectic face, and finally to Brooklyn, who sat stunned in the leather armchair, holding the pen that held the power to upend all of their worlds. For a long moment, Brooklyn just stared at the pen in her hand. It felt impossibly heavy. Outside the library, The party guests, who had by now pieced together the magnitude of the drama, were crowded into the foyer, a silent, staring mob. The string quartet was long forgotten. The champagne was going flat. This was the real entertainment. Her mind reeled, trying to connect the dots. Alistair, her kind, quiet friend. He hadn't just been a billionaire. He had been a grand master playing a chess game she never knew existed. He had seen Gaius's ambition, his greed. He had sold Gaius the very symbol of his success, knowing that he was placing it, and Gaius himself, into a checkmate position. He hadn't just given her a house. He had given her justice. He had given her power. She looked up from the document and met Gaius's eyes. They were wackled with a mixture of disbelief, rage, and a dawning, sickening realization. He was no longer looking at his pathetic, discarded wife. He was looking at the woman who was about to become his landlord. "Don't you dare sign that," he whispered, his voice shaking with fury. "Brooklyn, I swear to God, I will fight this. I will drag you through every court in the country. You will not do this to me." Genevieve stepped forward, her beautiful face twisted into an ugly sneer. "He's right. You will be buried in legal fees. We have the best lawyers money can buy. You have nothing." Brooklyn looked at Genevieve, then at Gaius. She thought of the cold night outside the gates. She thought of Genevieve's triumphant smirk. She thought of Gaius's chilling words. "You will be well compensated for it." And she thought of Alistair's promise. "Never let anyone make you feel small." A strength she never knew she possessed surged through her. It was as if Alistair himself was standing beside her, whispering encouragement. She picked up the pen. The scratch of the nib on the thick paper was the loudest sound in the mansion. She signed her name, Brooklyn Reyes, in clear, firm script. Not Brooklyn Horton. Reyes. Her name. She pushed the document back across the desk to Robert Peterson, who gave her a whole, almost imperceptible nod of approval. "It's done," the lawyer announced, his voice projecting to the crowd in the doorway. "The Crestwood estate is now the sole and legal property of Miss Brooklyn Reyes." A collective gasp, louder this time, rippled through the onlookers. Beatrice Horton, who had been silent until now, a statue of pure shock, let out a strangled cry. "No. This is Horton land. It belongs to my son. To my grandson." She pointed a trembling finger at Brooklyn's belly. "Your grandson will be very well taken care of, Beatrice," Brooklyn said, her voice ringing with newfound authority as she stood up from the chair. "He will be raised here in his home. My home." The shift was palpable. She was no longer a guest, a victim, a problem. She was the owner, the matriarch, the queen of the castle. Gaius stared at her, his face a kaleidoscope of emotions. For a fleeting second, his rage was replaced by a look of utter bafflement, as if he was seeing her for the first time. The quiet, compliant woman he had married was gone. In her place stood someone he didn't recognize, someone formidable. His mind, ever the opportunist, was already shifting gears. "Brooklyn, darling." He began, his voice taking on a sickeningly sweet, placating tone. "Let's not be hasty. We can talk about this. We're still married. What's yours is mine. We're a family." Brooklyn laughed. It wasn't a hysterical sound, but a low, confident chuckle that chilled him to the bone. "A family? You told me our family was over 2 days ago, Gaius. You told me Genevieve was the future. And as for us being married, Mr. Peterson, I believe my husband already has divorce papers drawn up. I'll be signing those as soon as my lawyer reviews them. I won't be contesting it." Genevieve's face turned white. "You can't just throw us out," she shrieked. "We live here." "You did," Brooklyn corrected her gently. "But now you don't. This is my property, and frankly, this party is over." She turned her gaze from her estranged husband and his lover, and looked towards the crowd of stunned guests huddled in the doorway. She saw their shocked faces, their whispered conversations, the way they looked at her now, with a mixture of awe and fear. She walked past Gaius, her head held high. She moved from the library into the center of the grand foyer, standing directly under the massive crystal chandelier. All eyes were on her. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she said, her voice calm and clear, carrying to every corner of the room. "I'm sure it's been a more eventful evening than you anticipated. I appreciate you celebrating the housewarming." A few nervous titters went through the crowd. "However," she continued, her voice hardening slightly, "I'm rather tired, and as the new owner of the Crestwood estate, I would like to have an early night." She let that sink in. "So I must ask you all to please finish your drinks and vacate the premises within the next 30 minutes. The valets will be available to retrieve your cars." It was a dismissal, a royal decree. Jaws dropped. Harriet Chen looked as if she might faint. Connor Webb simply stared his mind, calculating the monumental shift in power he had just witnessed. Brooklyn's gaze finally landed on Gaius, Genevieve, and Beatrice, who stood frozen in the library doorway, utterly defeated. "That," she said, her voice dropping, so only they could hear it, "includes the three of you. I want you off my property. Now!" The exodus was a sight to behold. What had been a glittering gala of the city's elite just an hour before now resembled a hurried, undignified retreat. Guests who had once looked at Brooklyn with pity or contempt now avoided her gaze, whispering amongst themselves as they scurried towards the door. They grabbed their coats, not waiting for the staff, and fled into the night, desperate to escape the scene of the Horton dynasty's spectacular collapse. The staff themselves were in a state of bewildered paralysis, unsure of who to take orders from. The caterers began to quietly pack away the untouched canapes. The string quartet packed their instruments with solemn faces. The entire elaborate stage set for Gaius's triumph was being dismantled around him. He, Genevieve, and Beatrice were the last to move. They stood as if rooted to the spot, watching their world dissolve. Beatrice was the first to break. A low, guttural sortum escaped her lips. "Everything," she whispered, looking around the grand foyer. "My son's legacy. Gone." She shot Brooklyn a look of pure, undiluted hatred before turning and stalking out of the mansion without another word, a queen abandoning her conquered kingdom. Genevieve, for her part, was a study in panicked fury. Her social standing, her future as the next Mrs. Horton, the life she had so carefully curated and fought for it, had all evaporated. She looked from Brooklyn's calm, resolute face to Gaius's stunned one. "Do something," she hissed at him. "Gaius, are you going to let her do this to us?" Gaius didn't seem to hear her. He was still staring at Brooklyn, his mind finally catching up to the reality of his situation. He had lost the house. He had lost the potential Beaumont deal. He had lost control. His public humiliation was absolute and complete. "Brooklyn," he said, his voice raspy. "Please, think about the baby. Our son. He needs his father." It was his last, desperate gambit. The child he had treated as a logistical problem was now his only potential bargaining chip. Brooklyn's hand went to her belly. My son needs a safe and stable home, she said, her voice devoid of its earlier anger, replaced now with a weary finality. He needs a mother who isn't crying at the gates, and he will have that. Here. I will never keep him from you, Gaius. You can be his father. But you will not be my husband, and you will not live in my house. The distinction was clear. He could have a relationship with his child, but he would have no claim on her or her life. Genevieve saw the finality in Brooklyn's eyes. She saw the defeat in Gaius's. With a choked sob of pure frustration, she turned on her heel, her designer gown flowing behind her, and fled the mansion, leaving Gaius standing alone in the cavernous foyer. He and Brooklyn stood in silence for a long moment amidst the half-dismantled party. The wreckage of their marriage lay between them. I underestimated you. He finally said the words, barely audible. It was the truest thing he had said all night. No, Brooklyn replied softly. You just never saw me at all. He finally turned and walked out the door, not with the confident stride of Gaius Horton, tech mogul, but with the slumped shoulders of a man who had lost everything. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind him, the sound echoing the final closing of a chapter in her life. She was alone, utterly, completely alone, in the silent, magnificent mansion. Robert Peterson approached her, holding a set of old, ornate keys on a simple steel ring. These are the master keys, Ms. Reyes, he said. Alistair wanted you to have them. There is also a portfolio and a letter from him for you in the study. He has left you more than just the house. He has ensured you have the means to maintain it and live comfortably for the rest of your life. You and your son are secure. Brooklyn took the keys, their weight solid and real in her hand. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for everything. I am merely the messenger, he said with a kind smile. Alistair was the architect. He would be very proud of you tonight. Good evening, Ms. Reyes. With a nod, the lawyer left his job complete. Brooklyn walked through the silent rooms, her footsteps echoing on the marble. She ran her hand along the polished wood of the grand staircase, looked up at the glittering chandelier, and touched the velvet curtains. This wasn't a cage anymore. It was a fortress. It was a sanctuary. It was home. She made her way up the stairs past the master suite she had once shared with Gaius and out onto the grand balcony overlooking the city. The chilly night air felt clean, fresh. The lights of the city spread out below her like a carpet of scattered jewels. It was the same view Gaius had shown her 6 months ago, declaring it the seat of their dynasty. But it was his dynasty that had crumbled tonight. A new one was just beginning. She placed both hands on her belly, feeling the gentle, rhythmic kick of the new life within her. A masterpiece in the making, Alistair had called him. Tears welled in her eyes, but for the first time in a long time, they were not tears of sorrow or humiliation. They were tears of gratitude, of relief, of a profound and staggering hope. She had walked through the fire and emerged not burned but forged anew. The world had tried to break her, but a kind old man in a library had given her the tools to rebuild it better and stronger than before. Looking out at the dawn that would soon break over the horizon, Brooklyn Reyes, the owner of the Crestwood estate, smiled. Her new life was just beginning. Brooklyn's story is a powerful reminder that our lowest moments can be the foundation for our greatest triumphs. It's a testament to the fact that true wealth isn't measured in dollars or square footage, but in kindness, integrity, and the quiet strength it takes to stand up for yourself. She went from a heartbroken wife to a formidable matriarch, not through revenge, but by staying true to her compassionate heart, which was recognized by the one person who mattered. Her journey proves that you can never underestimate the power of a single act of kindness or the resolve of a woman fighting for the future of her child. If you were moved by Brooklyn's incredible transformation from despair to empowerment, please let us know by hitting that like button. Share this story with anyone who needs to be reminded that their worth is not defined by others. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories of justice and resilience. What part of Brooklyn's story resonated with you the most? Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you.